Ozians, I'm the Louisiana Quadling, a Wizard of Oz collector and enthusiast, sharing with you my thoughts, my collection, and a little bit of my musical talent with all of you, and welcome to my channel. Today, we are going to with this soundtrack release. Intrada released Return to Oz on this 2-CD set in 2015 as part of their special collection series. The CDs were issued in a 2-CD jewel case. The booklet features the theatrical poster with artwork by Drew Struzan. When these CDs were released, Intrada offered signed copies by David Shire, and that's the one that I have here. I just couldn't resist. I mean, duh, I had to have one. It's David Shire. Anyways, the booklet features notes about the film's production and the soundtrack, of course. What I found most interesting in here was a list of where all of the music cues came from in the Walt Disney archives. You can really see the painstaking work that went into creating this CD release. And as a bonus, the front cover is reversible. You can slip the booklet in backwards and display the alternate Struzan poster that featured Mombi. The inner CD case shows more Mombi underneath the CDs. The back shows the destroyed Emerald City with the track listings on top of it. Now that we've gotten all of the technical jargon out of the way, what do I actually think about the soundtrack itself? Okay, so I'm a little biased since Return to Oz is my favorite Oz movie. Naturally, the soundtrack is my favorite Wizard of Oz soundtrack. One of the things that's been kind of interesting is listening to what other fans think and describe the soundtrack as, or at least try to describe it. I'm hopefully gonna try and give you a clear picture, at least for me, of what this soundtrack is, and also what David Shire wanted this soundtrack to be. Return to Oz is the first Oz production to deviate from what had become the standard up until this point, and also currently, of having contemporary or pop music be the soundtrack to an Oz film. This, of course, started with L. Frank Baum himself back in 1903 with the original stage play vaudeville version of The Wizard of Oz. Now, I know that somebody will probably challenge me on this one and say, but the MGM soundtrack is definitely not pop music. Well, Over the Rainbow is actually one of the best examples of something called the American pop music form. This is the actual format of how the song is written. It's probably more commonly called AABA. Of course, what does that mean? Well, we're talking about the different sections that are used in this song. So with AABA, you have the first section that's introduced, which is the A section. That section is then repeated. Then you have an alternative B section. This is sometimes referred to as the bridge part of a song. And then the A section repeats. And this style of writing a song is still used today. So, the MGM movie soundtrack actually is pop music. It's just not quite the pop music that you thought it was. So, instead of having contemporary 80s pop synth music, Return to Oz instead features period music from the turn of the 20th century that, according to David Shire, would have been music that Dorothy would have heard. Probably one of the easiest references to that time period's music that's in the soundtrack is the ragtime piece heard in Oz, which of course references Scott Joplin's wonderful ragtime pieces like The Maple Leaf Rag and The Entertainer. But what is the rest of the soundtrack referencing? The turn of the 20th century was actually a really interesting time in music history. Composers during this era were reacting to the Romantic era, which had been started by Beethoven back in the early 1800s. While I do think that this soundtrack is influenced by Romanticism, whenever I hear it, I definitely hear influences of composers like Dvorak or Wagner. I do, however, think that this soundtrack is influenced by two movements that happened during the turn of the 20th century, and those are Impressionism and Expressionism. You're probably more familiar with Impressionistic painters like Monet or Renoir. Well, Impressionism also affected music during this time period as well. A great example of an Impressionistic composer is Debussy. Impressionism in music creates moods with music. The exact opposite can be said for Expressionism. This movement actually purposefully made music dissonant and ugly. The Return to Oz soundtrack definitely has its expressionistic moments, but I do think that overall it's more heavily influenced by the Romantic and Impressionistic eras in music. There are multiple CD releases of the Return to Oz soundtrack, and this is definitely by far the best one. The CD includes almost the entire movie soundtrack. I say that because there are a couple of tracks that are unfortunately missing. One of the tracks on here, like Mombi's Awake, is unfortunately an alternate cue and not the one that's used in the final film. There are a couple others that are missing, but let's just not get into too much of a specific on griping about this because there's so many great things about this CD release. There's so much unreleased music on this CD, and there's also tracks that we didn't even know existed that were originally meant to be in the movie, and there's also alternate cues on this CD release. And if you also missed out on that original Return to Oz LP from 1985, it's also included here on disc 2. I definitely prefer the movie soundtrack to the original album version of Return to Oz that was released in 1985, mostly for the instrumentation. The album release is definitely a much more digestible album than the entire film soundtrack, which is around 85 minutes. It's nice and lengthy. The original album release is somewhere around 49 to 50 minutes long. So if you love Return to Oz, David Shire, and maybe some turn of the 20th century inspired music, this is definitely a CD to pick up. If you can get this CD for less than $50, I'd say you definitely got yourself a deal. Now, if you're not into physical media, you can also download this soundtrack from either Amazon or iTunes, or even stream it on Spotify. What's your favorite Wizard of Oz soundtrack? Comment down below. And if you liked that video, please give it a thumbs up, comment down below, and subscribe. New videos are posted every 2 weeks on the 15th and last day of each month. And if that doesn't satisfy your appetite for Oz, follow the link in the description to ozclub.org and join the International Wizard of Oz Club. Until next time, bye y'all.